The day my granddaughter whispered those words in my ear, my entire world shifted. For 7 years, I believed I was doing the right thing. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of trust. 7 years of sending money to a man I thought was protecting my daughter's legacy. And not once did I imagine that the biggest mistake of my life was hiding in plain sight. My name is Daniel Carter, and at 68 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. The story began years earlier when I lost my daughter, Emily. No parent is ever prepared for that phone call. One moment, your child is laughing and making plans for the future. The next, all that's left are photographs, memories, and a silence so heavy it follows you everywhere. Emily was my only child. She was smart, kind, and stubborn in the best possible way. Most importantly, she was a mother of my granddaughter, Sophie, the brightest light in my life. After Emily passed away, Sophie was only 6 years old. She didn't fully understand what had happened. She just kept asking when her mother would come home. Those questions broke my heart every single time. Emily's husband, Ryan, suddenly became a single father. At least, that's what everyone believed. He stood at the funeral, looking exhausted and devastated. People praised him. People admired him. People called him strong. And I believed every word. A few months after Emily's death, Ryan came to visit me. I still remember that afternoon. The rain tapped against the windows while he sat across from me at the kitchen table. He looked tired. His shoulders were slumped. His voice was shaky. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I'm doing everything I can for Sophie, but things are getting difficult." I immediately asked what was wrong. He explained that raising a child alone wasn't easy. There were school expenses, medical bills, activities, unexpected costs. The list seemed endless. Before leaving, he hesitated near the front door. Then he looked back at me. I hate asking for help. That sentence hooked me instantly, because people who truly need help often say exactly that. Or so I thought. The following week, I sent him money. Not much at first, just enough to ease the burden. Then another payment came. Then another. Months turned into years. What started as occasional support eventually became a routine. Every year, I transferred thousands of dollars. I told myself it was for Sophie. Everything was for Sophie. Whenever Ryan thanked me, he made sure to mention her. Sophie needs new school supplies. Sophie wants to join a program. Sophie's future matters. And every time he said her name, I reached for my wallet, because what grandfather wouldn't? Meanwhile, Sophie grew older. She became intelligent, polite, and surprisingly observant. Sometimes I would take her out for lunch. Other times she spent weekends at my house. Those weekends became the happiest moments of my life. But as the years passed, I started noticing something strange. Whenever I asked Ryan direct questions about finances, his answers felt rehearsed. Not wrong, just polished. Too polished, like someone reading from a script. At first, I ignored it. Grief changes people. Stress changes people. That was the excuse I kept giving him. And giving myself. One Saturday afternoon, Sophie came to spend the weekend with me. She was 13 by then, old enough to notice things, old enough to understand more than adults realized. We baked cookies together, watched old movies, and laughed about stories from when she was little. For a few hours, life felt normal again. Then evening arrived, and everything changed. We were cleaning the kitchen when Sophie suddenly became quiet, very quiet. She kept glancing toward the doorway as if someone might be listening. I remember setting down a coffee mug and asking if she was okay. She nodded, but her expression said otherwise. A few seconds later, she walked closer, then even closer, until she was standing right beside me. What happened next still sends chills down my spine. She leaned toward my ear and whispered, "Grandpa, please stop sending Dad money." The room seemed to freeze. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw something that terrified me. Fear, real fear. And before I could ask another question, Sophie quietly added, "There's something you don't know." That night, I barely slept, because deep down I knew one thing. Whatever secret Sophie was carrying had the power to destroy everything I thought I knew. By the way, if you've made it this far, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you were in Daniel's position, would you have asked questions sooner or kept trusting Ryan? The moment Sophie whispered those words, I knew something was wrong. Children don't usually carry that kind of fear in their eyes. Not unless they've seen something they shouldn't have. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I sat alone in the living room staring at the dark television screen. Her words kept repeating in my mind. Grandpa, please stop sending Dad money. Why would she say that? For 7 years, every dollar I sent was supposed to help her. Every transfer, every check, every sacrifice. If Sophie was asking me to stop, then something wasn't adding up. The next morning, I decided not to push her immediately. I didn't want to scare her. Instead, I made breakfast and acted as if everything was normal. Pancakes were always her favorite. For a while, she seemed relaxed. She smiled. She laughed. She looked like any ordinary teenager spending time with her grandfather. But every now and then, I caught her staring into space, thinking, worried, carrying something far too heavy for someone her age. Finally, while we were washing dishes together, I gently asked, Sophie, about what you told me yesterday. She immediately froze. The smile disappeared from her face. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly asked, You won't tell Dad I said anything? That question alone made my stomach tighten. I promised her I wouldn't. She looked relieved, but only slightly. Then she lowered her voice. Grandpa, Dad always says we're struggling. I nodded. That wasn't new. Ryan had been telling me that for years. But we're not. The words hit me like a punch. What do you mean? I asked. Sophie hesitated. Then she spoke carefully. Last year, Dad bought a new boat. I blinked. A boat? Ryan had never mentioned owning a boat. Not once. Before I could respond, Sophie continued. And he got another car. Another car? My confusion was growing rapidly. Every time Ryan called me, he sounded desperate. Every conversation was about bills, expenses, problems, financial pressure. Yet Sophie was talking about boats and new vehicles. None of it made sense. Maybe there was another reason. I said carefully. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone. Not yet. But Sophie slowly shook her head. No, Grandpa. Then she added something that made my chest tighten. He tells people you send him money because you're helping me. I nodded. That's true. She looked straight at me. No. The room suddenly felt smaller. He spends most of it on himself. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I wanted to believe she was mistaken. I wanted there to be another explanation. But deep down, tiny pieces of a puzzle were beginning to connect. Ryan's vague answers, his constant requests, his unwillingness to discuss details, the expensive clothes he'd started wearing, the vacations that seemed a little too luxurious, things I had noticed but never questioned, because trust has a strange way of making us blind. Still, I needed proof, real proof, not assumptions, not suspicions, proof. That afternoon, I drove Sophie home. Ryan greeted us with his usual smile, the same smile I trusted for years, the same smile that suddenly looked different, almost rehearsed. As we stood in the driveway, he thanked me for having Sophie over. Then he casually mentioned that school expenses were increasing again. I nearly laughed. The timing was unbelievable. Less than an hour after hearing Sophie's warning, Ryan was already planting the seed for another request. I forced myself to smile. Times are tough, I said. His eyes immediately lit up, almost as if he expected money to follow those words. That reaction didn't escape my notice. Not this time. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking. The more I replayed the last 7 years, the more questions appeared. Questions I should have asked long ago. That evening, I opened my filing cabinet. Inside were years of bank statements, transfer records, receipts, notes. I spent hours going through everything. By midnight, stacks of papers covered my dining table. And what I discovered shocked me. The total amount I'd sent Ryan wasn't just a few $1,000s. It wasn't even close. When I finally added everything together, My hand started trembling. The number staring back at me was far larger than I ever imagined. Over 7 years, I had sent him enough money to buy a house. Enough money to completely change someone's life. And suddenly, one terrifying question entered my mind. If that money wasn't being used for Sophie, then where had it gone? I looked down at the mountain of paperwork scattered across the table. For the first time in 7 years, I stopped seeing myself as a helpful grandfather and started wondering if I had been the victim of a carefully planned lie. Before we go further, tell me this. If you discovered someone had been lying to you for years, would you confront them immediately or gather proof first? And don't forget to share where you're watching from. I always enjoy reading those comments. That night, sleep was impossible. The stacks of bank statements covering my dining table seemed to stare back at me. For years, I had believed every dollar was helping Sophie build a better future. Now, I wasn't sure what to believe. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and continued reviewing every payment I had ever sent Ryan. At first, the transfers looked normal. A few $1,000s here, several thousand there. School expenses, medical costs, emergency repairs. The reasons were always different. But as I organized everything by date, a strange pattern began to emerge. Almost every major request of money was followed by a period where Ryan seemed unusually comfortable. At the time, I had never thought much about it. Now, I couldn't stop noticing it. I remembered one year when Ryan claimed Sophie needed expensive tutoring. A few weeks later, he posted photos from a luxury resort. Another time, he told me unexpected home repairs had nearly drained his savings. Less than a month later, he arrived at a family gathering wearing a watch that looked far too expensive for someone supposedly struggling financially. Back then, I ignored these things. Trust can make even obvious signs seem invisible. But trust was beginning to disappear, and questions were taking its place. Over the next several days, I started paying closer attention. I didn't accuse Ryan. I didn't confront him. I simply watched. The more I observed, the more uncomfortable I became. Whenever family members discussed money, Ryan somehow managed to steer the conversation toward how difficult life was for him. He had an answer for everything, a story for every situation, a reason for every problem. Yet none of those stories ever came with real details. Everything sounded convincing on the surface, but underneath there was nothing solid. One evening, I called an old friend named Thomas. We had known each other for over 30 years. Thomas had spent most of his career working in financial investigations before retiring. If anyone could help me make sense of things, it was him. After listening carefully, he remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he said something I would never forget. "Daniel, honest people usually provide information before you ask. Dishonest people provide explanations after they're questioned." The sentence hit me hard, because Ryan always seemed prepared with explanations. Always. Thomas agreed to help me review everything. 2 days later, we sat together in my study, surrounded by documents, transfer records, bank statements, old emails, text messages, receipts, anything connected to Ryan. For hours, we worked through the paperwork. Then Thomas suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed at several dates. "Look at these." I leaned closer. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw it. Several large money transfers I had sent Ryan happened only days before purchases that appeared on social media. Luxury trips, expensive dinners, high-end electronics. The timing wasn't proof, but it was suspicious, very suspicious. The deeper we dug, the worse things looked. By the end of the afternoon, I felt physically sick. Not because we had proven Ryan was guilty, but because we were finding enough questions to make me fear the answer. Then something unexpected happened. Sophie called me. Her voice sounded nervous. "Grandpa, are you busy?" "Not at all," I replied. There was a long pause. Then she quietly said, "Dad has been acting strange." Immediately, my attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" "He keeps asking if I've talked to you." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you tell him?" "The truth." "What truth?" "That I've visited you." Another pause followed. Then Sophie lowered her voice. But I don't think that's what he's really asking. A chill ran down my spine. For the first time, I began wondering if Ryan suspected something. Maybe he had noticed a change in my behavior. Maybe he sensed my trust was fading. Or maybe he was simply worried about secrets being exposed. That evening, after ending the call, I sat alone in silence. The house felt colder than usual. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, my thoughts refused to settle. For 7 years, I had viewed Ryan as family. For 7 years, I had defended him whenever others questioned his decisions. For 7 years, I had trusted him without demanding proof. Now, for the first time, I was beginning to wonder if that trust had been his greatest advantage. As I prepared for bed, my phone suddenly vibrated. A new message appeared on the screen. The sender was unknown. There was no name, no explanation, just a single photograph attached to the message. Confused, I opened it. The moment I saw the image, my blood ran cold. Because standing in that photograph was Ryan, and he wasn't alone. The woman beside him definitely wasn't family. And judging by the way they were holding each other, they were far more than friends. For several seconds, I could only stare at the screen. Then another message arrived. This one contained only 6 words. You deserve to know the truth. I barely slept after receiving the anonymous photograph. The image kept replaying in my mind. Ryan standing beside a woman I had never seen before. His arm wrapped comfortably around her. The way they looked at each other wasn't casual. It wasn't friendly. It was intimate. The kind of closeness people usually try to hide. By sunrise, I'd already looked at the photograph dozens of times. Every detail seemed important. Every small clue felt like a missing piece of a much larger puzzle. But one question kept bothering me. Who sent it? Whoever was behind those messages clearly knew something. And they wanted me to know it too. The problem was I had no idea whether I could trust them. Later that morning, I met Thomas at a small cafe across town. The moment he saw my face, he knew something had happened. Without saying a word, I handed him my phone. He studied the photograph carefully. Then he looked back at me. Do you know her? I shook my head. Never seen her before. Thomas zoomed in on the image. For several seconds, he remained silent. Then he pointed toward the background. Look at this. At first, I didn't understand what he was seeing. Then I noticed a hotel sign, partially visible behind Ryan and the woman. It wasn't enough to identify the exact location, but it was enough to tell us something important. This wasn't a random snapshot. Someone had followed them, or at least knew exactly where they were. Suddenly, the anonymous messages felt much more serious. Someone had been watching, and someone wanted Ryan exposed. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything else. My thoughts kept drifting back to Sophie. If Ryan was hiding a relationship, what else was he hiding? And more importantly, did Sophie know? That question bothered me more than anything. A few days later, I got my answer. Sophie called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded nervous, almost frightened. Grandpa, are you busy? Never too busy for you. She hesitated. Then she asked a question that instantly grabbed my attention. Have you ever met Dad's friend Claire? I sat upright. Claire. A name. Finally, a name. No. I replied carefully. Who is Claire? The silence that followed felt unusually long. When Sophie finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Dad says she's just a friend. Just a friend. Those 3 words immediately reminded me of the photograph. The unknown woman. The hotel. The secret messages. My instincts were screaming. But I stayed calm. Why are you asking? Sophie sighed. Because she's always around. That answer hit me harder than I expected. Always around. Not occasionally. Not sometimes. Always. The more Sophie talked, the worse things sounded. Claire attended family outings. Claire appeared at dinners. Claire was apparently involved in decisions that should have belonged only to Ryan and Sophie. And according to Sophie, this had been happening for years. Years. My stomach tightened. Because if that was true, Ryan had been living a completely different life from the one he described to me. The struggling single father image suddenly seemed less believable. That evening, I sat alone in my study, reviewing old memories. I thought about every conversation Ryan and I had shared, every emotional speech, every desperate request, every promise. Looking back now, something felt wrong. Not one major decision had ever been discussed openly. Everything was always vague. Just enough information to gain sympathy. Never enough information to verify. The next afternoon, another anonymous message arrived. My pulse immediately quickened. This time there was no photograph, only a short sentence. Asked him about the beach house. I stared at the message. The beach house? I had never heard Ryan mention any beach house. Not once. And that was exactly what made the message so disturbing. Because if Ryan truly owned access to a beach property while constantly asking me for money, then everything Sophie had warned me about was starting to make sense. I immediately called Thomas. When I told him about the message, he became unusually interested. "Daniel," he said carefully, "sometimes people reveal more through what they don't mention than what they do." I knew exactly what he meant. For 7 years, Ryan had shared endless stories about financial hardship, but somehow expensive vacations, luxury purchases, Claire, and now a possible beach house had never come up. Not once. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was secrecy. And secrets rarely stay buried forever. As evening approached, I received another call from Sophie. She sounded more anxious than ever. "Grandpa, what is it?" For several seconds, she didn't answer. Then she quietly said something that sent a chill down my spine. "I think Dad knows I've been talking to you." My heart immediately started racing. "What happened?" He keeps asking questions. "About me?" "About everything." The fear in her voice was impossible to ignore. And at that moment, I realized the situation was becoming bigger than missing money. Much bigger. Because somewhere beneath all the lies, hidden accounts, mysterious messages, and secret relationships, there was a frightened teenage girl caught in the middle. And for the first time, I wasn't just looking for answers. I was looking for a way to protect Sophie. What would you have done in Daniel's position? Would you confront Ryan now, or keep gathering evidence until the full truth comes out? And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing viewers from around the world. The photograph and the anonymous messages had already shattered most of the trust one once had in Ryan. But what I discovered next was even worse. For days, Thomas and I continued digging. Every document, every payment, every transfer, every clue. At this point, I wasn't looking for suspicion anymore. I was looking for the truth, and the truth was finally beginning to reveal itself. One afternoon, Thomas called me unexpectedly. His voice sounded different. Serious. Urgent. "Daniel, I think we found something." Within 30 minutes, I was sitting across from him in his office. Several documents were spread across his desk. The moment I sat down, he slid one paper toward me. "Look at this." I scanned the page. At first, nothing stood out. Then I noticed a familiar address. Ryan's address. My stomach tightened. What am I looking at? I asked. Thomas pointed to a specific section. "An account." I frowned. "What kind of account?" He leaned back in his chair. "A private investment account." For several seconds, I simply stared at him. Ryan had spent years telling me he could barely stay afloat financially. Years claiming he was struggling to support Sophie. Years asking for help. And now there was an investment account? That didn't make sense. Not even a little. Thomas continued. "This account has been active for years." My pulse quickened. "How much?" He hesitated. Then he slowly turned another page toward me. The number printed there made my heart pound. The balance wasn't a few $1,000s. It wasn't even tens of thousands. It was significantly more. Far more than someone supposedly living paycheck to paycheck should have been able to save. I looked at Thomas. Neither of us needed to say what we were both thinking. Where had that money come from? Because one possibility was becoming impossible to ignore. For 7 years, Ryan had repeatedly asked me for financial support. For 7 years, I had trusted his stories. For 7 years, money had flowed from my account into his life. And now, suddenly, there was a hidden investment account growing quietly in the background. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but I still needed certainty. That evening, I returned home feeling sick. Not angry. Not yet. Just exhausted. The emotional weight of everything was becoming difficult to carry. I sat in Emily's old room for nearly an hour. Most of her belongings were still there. Photographs, books, awards, little reminders of the daughter I missed every single day. As I looked at one family picture, a painful thought crossed my mind. If Emily were alive today, would any of this have happened? I doubted it. She would have protected Sophie. She would have seen through Ryan's excuses. And she never would have allowed someone to exploit her family. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Sophie. The moment I heard her voice, I could tell something was wrong. "Grandpa, what's happened?" She hesitated. Then she said quietly, "Dad is angry." My concern immediately grew. "Why?" "I don't know." But the way she said it told me she probably did know. "He keeps asking questions." "What kind of questions?" She lowered her voice. "About you." That answer sent a chill through me. Ryan was nervous. Very nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. For years, he had controlled the narrative. For years, nobody challenged him. Now things were changing, and he could feel it. Later that afternoon, another unexpected message arrived from the same anonymous number. My hands tightened around the phone. Inside was a short message. No greeting. No explanation. Just one sentence. "You're looking in the wrong place." Attached was a screenshot. A bank transaction. One I had never seen before. The account number was unfamiliar. The destination was unfamiliar. But one name immediately caught my attention. Ryan Carter. And beneath it was a transfer amount that made my stomach drop, because the payment had been made only 3 days after one of the largest checks I had ever sent him. For several moments, I simply stared at the screen. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. The transaction wasn't recent. It had happened years ago, which meant this wasn't a one-time mistake. This might have been happening for a very long time. I immediately called Thomas. After reviewing the screenshot, he became unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Daniel." "What?" "If this document is authentic, we're not talking about poor financial decisions anymore." I felt my chest tighten. "What are we talking about then?" Thomas looked directly at me, and his answer changed everything. "We may be looking at deliberate fraud." The room fell silent, because for the first time, someone had finally said the word neither of us wanted to believe. Fraud. And deep down, I knew one thing. If Thomas was right, Ryan's entire life was about to come crashing down. By this point, there was no turning back. For weeks, Thomas and I had been gathering information piece by piece. The hidden relationship, the mysterious beach house, the expensive purchases, the investment account, the suspicious transactions. Every new discovery pointed in the same direction. Ryan had been lying. The only question left was how much. And soon, we were about to find out. One afternoon, Thomas called me with news that made my heart race. "Daniel, I think we finally have enough." I immediately drove to his office. The moment I arrived, I could tell something was different. Thomas looked confident. For the first time since we started investigating, he wasn't searching for answers. He had found them. Several folders sat neatly arranged on his desk. Documents, statements, property records, financial reports, evidence, lots of evidence. As I sat down, Thomas pushed one folder toward me. "Open it." My hands felt strangely heavy. The moment I looked inside, my stomach dropped. Property records. Not one property. Not two. Several. Ryan's name appeared again and again. Some properties were owned directly. Others were connected through business arrangements. But the pattern was obvious. The man who constantly claimed financial hardship had quietly built a growing collection of assets. I felt anger rising inside me, not because of the money, because of the lies. For 7 years, he had used Sophie as a reason. Every request, every excuse, every emotional story. It had always been about Sophie, or so he wanted me to believe. Thomas opened another folder. This one was even worse. Inside were records connected to Claire. The same woman from a photograph. The same woman Ryan claimed was just a friend. Yet the document suggested something entirely different. Joint financial activity, shared expenses, travel records, years of involvement. Years. Not months. Years. Suddenly everything made sense. Ryan hadn't been struggling to survive. He had been funding a second life. A life I knew nothing about. A life partially financed by my trust. The realization hit harder than I expected, because betrayal from strangers hurts. But betrayal from family cuts much deeper. That evening, Sophie called again. The moment I answered, I noticed something unusual. She sounded relieved. "Grandpa, are you okay?" I paused. "Why are you asking?" "Because Dad seems nervous." That caught my attention immediately. "Nervous how?" "He keeps making phone calls." "To who?" "I don't know." Then she lowered her voice. "And he's arguing with Claire." I exchanged a glance with Thomas, who was sitting across from me. For the first time, it seemed the pressure was reaching Ryan. The walls around him were beginning to crack. And people under pressure often make mistakes. Big mistakes. The following morning, another anonymous message arrived. By now, I almost expected them. This one contained a single document. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then I saw the date. My heart nearly stopped. The document had been created just weeks after Emily's death. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. Each reading made me feel worse. Because according to what I was seeing, Ryan had started moving money almost immediately after Emily passed away. Almost immediately, while family members were grieving. While Sophie was trying to understand why her mother wasn't coming home. While everyone believed Ryan was devastated. He had apparently been focused on something else entirely. Money. For several minutes, I couldn't speak. Thomas carefully reviewed the document. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Daniel," I looked up. "This changes everything." I already knew he was right. The timeline was impossible to ignore. What once looked like poor decisions now appeared far more deliberate, far more calculated, and far more disturbing. That afternoon, we made an important decision. No more guessing. No more assumptions. No more waiting. The evidence had reached a point where professional authorities needed to see it. Everything. The financial records. The transfers. The property documents. The account information. All of it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Because the truth was finally surfacing. And once the truth begins to rise, it's almost impossible to push it back down. Late that night, I received one final call. It was Sophie. Her voice was shaking. "Grandpa." My heart immediately sank. "What happened?" There was silence. Then she spoke. "Dad knows." Every muscle in my body tensed. "What does he know?" Another pause. Then came the words that changed everything. "He knows someone has been helping you." The room fell completely silent. Because if Ryan had figured that out, then he was no longer worried about being exposed. He was searching for the person exposing him. And desperate people are often capable of desperate actions. If you followed Daniel's journey this far, tell me in the comments, at what point would you have stopped trusting Ryan? And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to support the channel, so you never miss another powerful story like this one. The moment Sophie told me that Ryan knew someone was helping me, I realized the situation had reached its breaking point. For months, the truth had been slowly rising to the surface. Now it was finally ready to explode. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced through every possibility. Would Ryan confront me? Would he try to destroy evidence? Would he disappear? Or would he finally admit everything? The next morning, I got my answer. My phone rang just after 9 o'clock. "Ryan." For several seconds, I stared at the screen before answering. The moment I picked up, I knew something had changed. His usual calm voice was gone. So was the confidence he always carried. "Daniel," he said sharply, "we need to talk." I remained calm. "About what?" There was a pause. Then he replied, "You know exactly what." For years, that tone would have intimidated me. Not anymore. We agreed to meet that afternoon. A public place. A restaurant near the center town. When I arrived, Ryan was already there. The moment I saw him, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot. His confident smile had vanished. For the first time in 7 years, he looked like a man losing control. As soon as I sat down, he got straight to the point. Someone has been feeding you lies. I almost laughed. Lies. After everything we had discovered. Hearing that word from him felt unbelievable. Instead, I calmly placed a folder on the table. The same folder Thomas and I had spent weeks building. Ryan looked at it, then at me, then back at the folder. Slowly, I opened it. Property records, investment accounts, financial transfers, travel documents, evidence connected to Claire, evidence connected to the hidden assets, evidence connected to the money. Page after page. The color drained from Ryan's face. For several minutes, he said nothing. The silence spoke louder than any excuse ever could. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Emily's death, he stopped pretending. The stories disappeared. The excuses disappeared. The performance ended. He knew it was over. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. The question stunned me, not because of what he said, because of what he didn't say. No denial, no outrage, no claims of innocence. Just one simple question. "What do you want?" That was all the confirmation I needed. I looked directly at him. "I want the truth." For several moments, he stared at the table. Then he began talking. The confession wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. In some ways, that made it even worse. He admitted taking advantage of my trust. He admitted exaggerating financial problems. He admitted using money for things that had nothing to do with Sophie. He admitted hiding parts of his life. And every word felt like another knife twisting deeper. By the time he finished speaking, I felt completely drained. Not angry, just disappointed. The kind of disappointment that only comes when someone destroys years of trust. The legal consequences came quickly after that. Once authorities reviewed the evidence, formal investigations began. Financial records were examined. Transactions were traced. Questions were asked. And eventually, Ryan was forced to answer them. The process took months. But in the end, the truth won. Some assets were recovered. Several financial arrangements were reversed. And Ryan faced consequences he never believed would catch up with him. But strangely, none of that became the most important part of the story. The most important part was Sophie. Throughout the entire ordeal, she showed more courage than most adults ever could. She had seen things that didn't make sense. She had trusted her instincts. And despite being afraid, she chose to speak up. One quiet evening, nearly a year later, Sophie and I sat together on my back porch watching the sunset. Life felt peaceful again. The investigations were over. The secrets were gone. The lies had finally been exposed. As we sat there, Sophie smiled and asked, "Grandpa, do you ever wish none of this had happened?" I thought about it carefully. Then I shook my head. "No." She looked surprised. I smiled. "Because if it hadn't happened, I never would have learned how brave you really are." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me. And in that simple moment, I realized something important. Ryan had taken money. He had taken trust. He had taken years of peace. But he hadn't taken the thing that mattered most. Family. Real family. The kind built on honesty. The kind built on love. The kind built on truth. And that truth had finally set us free. Thank you for joining Daniel and Sophie's journey. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson stood out to you the most. And if you enjoy powerful family stories with shocking twists and emotional endings, consider supporting the channel and becoming part of our growing community. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next.